It is tax season, which means that it's time to do some auditing. But this episode is not about fixing your life, it's just simply about taking inventory. So, in the spirit of audit season, I'm walking through the idea of a self audit, looking honestly at where our time, care, energy, and presence are going and how they're being met. Stay tuned. Guys, welcome to the Bird Brain Podcast, where the goal is to rise above it all, stay elevated, create that infinity, and up your you. I'm your host, Isaiah, and today we are doing an audit, y'all. I think I've been spending a lot of time just in reflection, of course, always in reflection, but also in transition and practice. I think there is room for all of them to exist at one time. I think a lot of times we get stuck in the space of reflection and it doesn't really allow us or require us to do more. We just have to reflect, and reflecting in itself can definitely be exhausting. It gives us something to do, so it feels like we are in motion. But if you look at the results, sometimes nothing ever comes to pass, right? You're just reflecting. And being that you're ruminating on something so much, it genuinely does feel like, well, I'm making a change or I'm growing, whatever, insert. But is anything really taking place? And I've been thinking about that for myself. I've been doing a lot of journaling, a lot of reflecting. I've been doing this with clients too, because I think it's super important to just get a good look at what has my spending habits look like. Okay. So I developed some questions. These are, questions to just ask yourself and really think about and consider and give yourself some honesty. Okay, and I'll break it down in sections so we can do this. And the reason why I think it will be helpful to you is if you are really looking to do some work on yourself. How often do you take inventory? I think we say we do a lot of times, right? It can be passive though, like to take actual inventory and do something about it. I've talked about this a lot, but journaling. Some people are fearful to sit down and journal. And it's like, why is that? Well, because it feels like a chore. It feels like I have to do something. But more than anything, I have to sit with myself. I have to practice a certain level of stillness. And journaling, there aren't any rules to it. It's just you having a conversation with yourself openly and honestly that nobody else is going to see. Nobody else even has to see. But it is for you to understand. So let's break it down into sections. Okay, first one is visibility and presence. Where do I feel the most seen? Ask yourself, where do I feel the most seen? Wherever you are in life, where do I feel the most seen? And what does it mean to be seen? It's not just how you function as a utility, right? Something that I've asked myself and also asked other people. Who are you without doing anything for others? What does that look like? Who is that person? Okay. Who are you without the things that you attach to, the identities, the titles, the accolades, the profession? Who are you? So ask yourself, where do I feel the most seen? Who do I feel the most seen by? And to be seen is also to be vulnerable, to be in a safe space to just unravel. Not in a negative way, but just kind of be without performing and over functioning. You know what I'm saying? Where do I feel tolerated instead of welcomed? That's a big one. Because a lot of times I think we will exist in spaces that reinforce a certain level of loneliness just to have people around us. And it's like, for what? In which spaces does my presence feel optional? There is this energy to certain dynamics in relationships. And if you're paying attention, you'll notice it's the difference between hey, you can come if you want, versus, hey, let's do this thing, or hey, I want you here. Okay? So, in which spaces does my presence feel optional? Where am I missed? And where am I not? Pay attention to the people who seem to only miss the access to you, not necessarily their responsibility when it comes to you. And what does it mean to actually be missed in relationships with others? Right? What actions are taken when somebody does say, hey, I miss you? What actions do you take when you say you miss somebody? And where do you not feel like you're missed? Where do you feel invisible? Here's a second section. This is energy and reciprocity. Where do I give consistently? Where do you feel like you pour most of your energy into? In a negative way, positive way, where do I give consistently? Where does effort feel one-sided? And be honest. In your family dynamics, in your partnership, in your friendships, at work, where does effort feel one-sided? And to really notice if effort feels one-sided is how drained you feel showing up to this space, how resentful you're becoming. A lot of times when we're becoming resentful, that is an indicator of something is not happening. We're not speaking up. Effort is not being made when it comes to us, right? A lot of times people exist in one-sided relationships because they haven't placed a boundary. They also haven't communicated a need. And sometimes it allows them to stay in control. People won't always admit that, but that is the truth. Okay? Who receives my care easily? Think about that. Which relationships just kind of bank on you always being the understanding one, always being the one that goes the extra mile, always being the one that's resilient, the strong one? Who receives your care easily? And at the same time, who requires me to explain my value? What spaces do you recognize in relationships where it's like you have to explain or over-explain loyalty? You have to explain reciprocity. You have to explain care, consideration. Where does that exist at? Section 3, emotional labor. Where do I hold things together for others? Be very mindful of that. And sometimes that does become your whole entire identity. Who gets my clarity? Who gets my patience? Who gets my reassurance? Who are these people? How do they feel when you are not functioning in those roles? Where am I the emotional anchor? Where does no one check on me? That's a big one, and get really honest. And pay attention to how your body responds as you think about the people in your life in terms of who checks on you and who does not. Section 4, self-abandonment signals. Where do I shrink myself? Think about all the spaces you exist in. Where are you pretending that everything is fine when it is actually not, just to keep the peace? Where do I soften my truth to stay connected? Sometimes relationships last long because we refuse to be honest. And as much as we say we want honest relationships, we often are looking for comfort, because if we wanted honest relationships, we'd be a little bit more truthful about how we feel and what we desire without the fear of being rejected. Where do I overfunction to keep the peace? That's a big one. Where do I already know the answer but avoid naming it? Right? Where have you recognized in certain relationships that it does require you to overgive to exist, but you're so fearful of stepping into that truth because it will mean that you are no longer perceived as a good guy? You realize that if you stop trying, the relationship wouldn't exist. You know certain things to be true. And avoiding it keeps the relationship going. But you might recognize that you're becoming very bitter and also very tired. Section 5, the internal inventory. What feels heavy lately? What feels heavy lately? Do you feel like you are undervalued in your workspace? Do you feel like you don't have fulfilling relationships? Do you feel like finances are burdensome? Do you feel like you're not living the life that you've actually desired or hoped to be existing in? What feels quietly nourishing? It could be your day-to-day. You know, for example, for me, I've been on this, I've been back on my running game, and it just naturally started out of nowhere. I noticed my body was craving outside more. So I was like, all right, I'll just go run. So every other day I'm running now. And it feels good. Like it feels necessary too. Like being out in nature, breathing, letting my body hurt in a different way. I recognize my body also responds to seasons in a very interesting way. Like it knows what it wants when it wants. And I think it's really cool to tap into that. Also when I'm writing, that is very important to me. Right? I come alive when I'm writing. So it is a quiet nourishment, and sometimes I recognize it's important to me because I'm not rushing through it. I'm just doing it. I mean, running does hurt sometimes, but even then, it's like it's a nice challenge, and I'm like, man, I'm gonna feel good after this. What feels expired? You know, maybe your role in relationships. You're starting to recognize, yep, this ain't working for me anymore. Or your desire to connect is pretty low because you recognized that you were the one that was willing to do all of it. Maybe you're tired of no longer, not speaking up. And that now needs to change. Okay? Maybe you do feel unfulfilled. What feels unfinished but still alive? This is a deep one. What have you been avoiding? But it nags at you, it gnaws at you constantly. What has been something that's big in your world or is taking up a lot of space for better or for worse? Maybe it's an adventure that you haven't taken. Maybe it's a desire to revisit a skill. Maybe it's something that you haven't said or just done, all out of fear. Think about it. Okay? So go through those sections and really just tap in and see what the deal is. An audit doesn't demand action. It doesn't ask you to confront anyone per se, to cut anyone off or make a decision. It just simply shows you what's true. You don't necessarily owe yourself conclusions today, but you do get to sit with the information. And that's enough. And if you want support processing what actually does come up, well, that's a different container. And I do have spots open for coaching. So after you do this audit and you find that things are kind of percolating, it's like, whoa, damn, well, what do I do next? How do I go about this? I have a couple of slots open to start for February. I'll leave the link in the description of this episode. But today was just an audit. All right? It's just clarity. So, as you move through the day, the next couple of days, as you listen to this episode, really take into consideration of where am I these days? What makes sense for me now? What does not? Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Take flight.